Sujin Park sat alone in the scrapyard, her small hands covered in grease as she worked on an old mining drill. The other kids from New Seoul Colony called her weird. They said she cared more about broken machines than making friends. Maybe they were right. The 14-year-old girl wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving another dark smudge. Around her, piles of discarded equipment stretched toward the horizon under the pale light of 3 moons. Old Earth machinery, broken alien devices from traders, and scraps from the mining operation filled the yard. Most people saw junk. Sujin saw possibilities. "There you are again," her aunt's voice cut through the night air. "Come inside. It's past midnight." Sujin looked up at the tall woman standing at the scrapyard fence. Aunt Minji never came looking for her unless the neighbors complained. The girl was supposed to live with her aunt and uncle after her parents died in the mine collapse 2 years ago. But they made it clear she was a burden they didn't want. "Just 5 more minutes," Sujin said. "I almost have this drill working." "Nobody cares about your stupid machines," Minji snapped. "If you spent half as much time on schoolwork as you do on that garbage, maybe you wouldn't be failing everything." Sujin's shoulders sagged. Her aunt was wrong about the schoolwork. She got perfect scores in engineering and math. It was the social classes she struggled with. How could she care about making small talk when there were beautiful, complex machines waiting to be fixed? Minji's footsteps faded as she walked away, muttering about ungrateful children. Sujin returned to her work. The drill's power core had been damaged, but she thought she could reroute the energy flow through the backup systems. Her hands moved with practiced skill, connecting wires and adjusting settings. A brilliant flash lit up the night sky. Sujin dropped her tools and looked up. A streak of fire was falling toward the far end of the scrapyard. It looked like a meteor, but something felt wrong. The object was too bright, and it moved in a strange pattern as it fell. The impact shook the ground beneath her feet. A column of smoke rose from where the object had crashed. Sujin grabbed her toolbox and a portable light. She should probably tell someone about the crash. But curiosity won over caution. The walk took her deeper into the scrapyard than she usually went. Here, the oldest and most broken equipment formed small mountains of twisted metal. The crash site was easy to find. A wide circle of melted scrap metal surrounded a smoking crater. In the center lay something that made Sujin's breath catch. It wasn't a meteor. The object was clearly artificial, about the size of a small house. Its surface was smooth and dark, with patterns of lines that pulsed with faint blue light. Parts of it were cracked and broken, but the basic shape was elegant and purposeful. Sujin climbed down into the crater, her heart pounding. This was definitely not human technology. The colony sometimes traded with alien merchants, but their ships looked nothing like this. This vessel had a beauty and complexity that made her want to understand how it worked. She walked around the craft, studying the damage. Several panels had been torn away, exposing what looked like internal systems. Strange symbols glowed softly on undamaged surfaces. The design was unlike anything she had ever seen. But her engineer's mind began to make sense of the patterns. Here was what might be a power distribution network. There was something that could be a control system, and that twisted section looked like it might be an engine or propulsion system. The damage was severe, but not beyond repair. Sujin opened her toolbox. She probably couldn't fix everything, but maybe she could help. The vessel had clearly been in some kind of accident. If there was someone inside, they might need emergency power restored. Working by the light of her portable lamp, she began to trace the power systems. The technology was advanced beyond anything humans had built, but the basic principles seemed familiar. Energy flowed from a central source through distribution nodes to various subsystems. Several of the nodes had been damaged in the crash. She pulled spare wire from her toolbox and began making connections. The alien materials were strange to work with, but her hands found ways to adapt human components to the foreign systems. She rerouted power around damaged sections and created bypass circuits where direct repair was impossible. Hours passed without her noticing. The work was challenging and fascinating. Each small success led to another problem to solve. The craft's builders had used design principles she had never seen, but her intuition guided her hands. As dawn approached, she made a final connection and stepped back. Several of the status lights that had been dark were now glowing softly. She had managed to restore partial power to what she hoped were life support systems. The vessel hummed quietly. Then, without warning, a section of the hull slid open with a soft hiss. Sujin stumbled backward, her heart racing. Had she accidentally triggered something? Was the ship's owner about to emerge? She grabbed her toolbox, ready to run if necessary. Nothing happened for long minutes. The opening remained dark and silent. Finally, curiosity overcame fear. She approached the entrance and shined her light inside. The interior was clearly designed for someone larger than humans. Strange equipment lined the walls, and what might be a pilot's chair sat in the center. Everything was elegant and purposeful, but sized for beings at least 7 feet tall. In the pilot's chair, she could just make out a motionless figure. Sujin hesitated at the entrance. She had read enough stories to know that first contact with aliens could be dangerous. But her repairs had been intended to help. If someone was hurt inside, she couldn't just walk away. She climbed through the opening and approached the pilot's chair. The figure wore what looked like armor or a protective suit. It was definitely not human. Too tall, and with proportions that seemed wrong. But it was breathing, which was a good sign. Small lights on the walls began to glow brighter as she moved through the ship. Her repairs were working better than she had hoped. The vessel's systems were coming back online. A new sound filled the air. Musical tones that might be some kind of communication system. Sujin realized the ship was trying to tell her something. She was no longer alone in the universe. The musical tones grew louder. And suddenly the air around Sujin shimmered. A soft voice spoke in perfect Korean, though the words seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emergency systems activated. Life support restored to minimal levels. Thank you, unknown being. Sujin nearly dropped her light. The ship was talking to her. The voice was calm and pleasant, but definitely artificial. Some kind of computer system. You're welcome, she whispered. Scanning, the voice continued. Species identified as human. Age approximately 14 standard years. How did a human child repair Corvani technology? 1. Before Sujin could answer, the figure in the pilot's chair began to move. What she had thought was armor was actually some kind of protective suit. The being inside was awakening from what might have been an emergency sleep. The figure sat up slowly and turned toward her. Even sitting, it was much taller than any human. The face behind a clear helmet was angular and fierce, with golden eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. When it spoke, the ship's translation system turned the alien words into Korean. Who dares enter my vessel? The voice was deep and commanding. Sujin backed toward the entrance, clutching her toolbox. I'm sorry. I was just trying to help. Your ship crashed, and I thought someone might be hurt. The alien warrior studied her for a long moment. You are human. Your species has barely achieved spaceflight. How did you restore power to my scout ship? I just followed the power lines and fixed the broken connections, Sujin said. It wasn't that hard once I figured out the basic layout. The alien's eyes widened. He stood up, his head nearly touching the ceiling, and moved to a wall panel. His large fingers danced across controls that meant nothing to Sujin. Numbers and symbols appeared on a display. Impossible, he muttered. The modifications you made. They increased efficiency by 23%. How did you know? To reroute power through the backup sensor array. I didn't know, Sujin admitted. It just seemed like the logical way to get around the damaged sections. The alien stared at her for so long that she wondered if the translation system had stopped working. Finally, he spoke again. I am Commander Zektar of the Corvani Defense Fleet. And you, human child, have just demonstrated engineering skills that would impress our military academy instructors. The ship's computer chimed softly. Commander, I am detecting approaching vehicles. Colony security forces, based on their movement patterns. Zektar moved quickly to another control panel. How far away? Approximately 2 minutes, until they reach the crash site. The commander turned back to Sujin. Your people cannot find me here. The technology on this vessel must not fall into the wrong hands. Can you help me reach open ground for takeoff? Thanks for watching. Into the strine. Sujin's mind raced. Colony security would ask lots of questions she couldn't answer. They might even blame her for the crash, somehow. And there was something about Commander Zektar that made her want to trust him, despite his fierce appearance. The main engines are still damaged, she said quickly. But if you can give me 10 minutes, I can rig a temporary fix that should get you airborne. You would do this? Even though you know nothing about me or my people? You're hurt and need help, Sujin said simply. That's enough. Zektar studied her face for another moment, then nodded. Show me what you need. The next few minutes were the most intense of Sujin's life. She worked frantically to bypass damaged engine components, while Zektar followed her instructions and handed her tools. The Corvani technology was more advanced than anything she had ever seen, but the basic principles of energy and motion were universal. Try it now, she said, making a final connection. The ship's hum deepened to a powerful throb. Outside, she could hear the sound of approaching vehicles. Remarkable, Zektar said, watching his displays. You have achieved in minutes what would have taken our repair teams hours to plan. Will it get you home? Sujin asked. More than that, the commander said. Your modifications have made my ship faster than it was when new. He paused, studying her again. Human child. What is your name? Sujin. Sujin Park, he repeated carefully. I owe you a debt that cannot easily be repaid. My people are fighting a war that we are losing. The enemy destroys entire worlds, leaving nothing behind. They call themselves the Devourers, and they have consumed 12 civilizations already. The sound of vehicles was getting closer. Sujin could see lights through the ship's entrance. Your world, Earth, is next on their target list, Zektar continued. We have been trying to stop them for 3 years, but our traditional tactics fail against their swarm intelligence. Then why don't you try something different? Sujin asked. Zektar's golden eyes seemed to shine brighter. What do you mean? Well, if the same tactics keep failing, maybe you need tactics they can't predict. My aunt always says I think in strange ways. Maybe that's what you need. Strange thinking. The commander was quiet for a moment while lights grew brighter outside. Then he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Sujin Park, he said formally. I am about to violate every military regulation in the Corvani Code. Will you come with me? Sujin Park. What? Your people would not understand what happened here tonight. They would ask questions and demand answers that could endanger both our species. But more importantly, you have shown abilities that could help win this war. Sujin stared at him. You want me to go into space? With you? I want you to meet our strategists and engineers. I want them to see how a human thinks about problems. Your modifications to my ship prove that your species approaches technology in ways we never considered. The vehicles were almost at the crater now. In seconds, security teams would be climbing down to investigate. I can't leave, Sujin said. I have school, and my aunt and uncle. Your aunt, who thinks you are a burden? Your school, where you are failing social classes because you prefer machines to gossip? Zektar's voice was gentle but direct. Sujin Park, when was the last time anyone told you that you were special? Never, she realized. No one had ever told her that. You could return home whenever you wished, Zektar continued. But first, help us save both our worlds. Outside, someone shouted orders. Flashlight beams began sweeping the crater. Sujin made her choice. Okay, she whispered. Zektar smiled. An expression that transformed his fierce face into something almost gentle. Computer, prepare for emergency takeoff. And Sujin? Yes? Welcome to the war. The journey through hyperspace was unlike anything Sujin could have imagined. Stars became streaks of light outside the scout ship's windows as they traveled faster than light itself. Zektar had given her a translation device that looked like a small earpiece, and now she could understand any language the Corvani computer played for her. Fleet arriving in visual range, the ship's computer announced. Sujin pressed her face to the window and gasped. Ahead of them, hundreds of massive warships hung in the darkness of space. Each vessel was larger than the entire New Sol colony, their hulls gleaming with armor and weapon systems. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The Corvani Defense Fleet, Zektar said with pride. The finest military force in the galaxy. Or at least, it was before we met the Devourers. As their small ship approached the largest vessel, Sujin could see the damage. Scorch marks covered the hulls of many ships. Some showed holes that had been hastily repaired. This was a fleet that had seen too much fighting and too few victories. Commander, the computer said, Admiral Vorthok is demanding immediate communication. Zektar grimaced. Put him through. The air in front of them shimmered. And suddenly, a hologram appeared. The figure was clearly Corvani, but much larger than Zektar. Scars covered his face, and his golden eyes burned with anger. Commander Zektar, the Admiral's voice boomed. Explain why you have brought an alien child aboard a Corvani military vessel. Admiral, this human repaired my scout ship using techniques unknown to our engineers. Her modifications increased system efficiency by over 20%. Impossible. Humans are a primitive species that has barely left their home system. Sujin felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to go in the small ship. With respect, Admiral, Zektar said firmly. I have seen the evidence. This human child, accomplished in minutes, what would take our best engineers hours to plan. Admiral Vorthok studied Sujin through the hologram. His expression was cold and dismissive. We do not need help from children, especially alien children. Return the human to its homeworld immediately. Admiral, that is an order, Commander. The hologram disappeared, leaving Sujin and Zektar alone in uncomfortable silence. I'm sorry, Sujin whispered. No, Zektar said firmly. The Admiral is wrong, but I will need to prove it. He touched his communication controls again. Flagship docking bay, this is Scout 7 requesting immediate landing clearance. 20 minutes later, Sujin found herself walking through corridors that made her feel like an ant. Everything was built for beings much larger than humans. The walls, doors, and equipment all emphasized how small and out of place she was. Corvani warriors stopped to stare as they passed. Some looked curious, others seemed angry. All of them made Sujin feel very small and very young. Where are we going? She asked. To see Chief Engineer Thokmar, Zektar replied. If anyone can appreciate your abilities, it will be him. The engineering section was a maze of machinery and workstations. Corvani technicians worked on projects that Sujin couldn't begin to understand. At the center of it all stood a massive Corvani, whose hands moved with surprising delicacy as he adjusted some complex device. Thokmar, Zektar called out. The chief engineer looked up, and his eyes widened when he saw Sujin. Commander, what is this? This is Sujin Park, the human who repaired my scout ship. I want you to test her abilities. Thokmar laughed, but not in a mean way. Commander, I appreciate your faith in alien potential, But this is a child. My apprentices train for years before they can work on military equipment. Then give her something simple, Zektar suggested. The chief engineer thought for a moment, then led them to a workstation where a complex device lay in pieces. This is a shield generator control unit from our flagship. It failed during the last battle, and my best technicians cannot determine why. If this human child can even identify the problem, I will be impressed. Sujin approached the workstation nervously. The device was like nothing she had ever seen. Crystals and metal components arranged in patterns that seemed almost artistic. But as she studied it, she began to see the logic behind the design. "May I touch it?" she asked. Thokmar nodded, clearly expecting her to fail quickly. Sujin picked up the main component and turned it in her hands. Energy flowed through crystalline pathways to focusing elements that directed the shield's power. It was beautiful and elegant, but she could see the problem. "Here," she said, pointing to a junction where 3 crystal paths met. "This connection point is designed perfectly for normal operations. But when the system runs at high power, it creates a feedback loop. The crystals are overloading each other." Thokmar moved closer, his expression changing from amusement to surprise. "Continue. You need a buffer here," Sujin continued, her confidence growing. "Something to absorb the excess energy when the system spikes. If you used a smaller crystal as a capacitor." She looked around the workstation and spotted a component that might work. Like this one, but modified to handle the resonance frequency. The chief engineer stared at the device, then at Sujin, then back at the device. "In 5 minutes, you identified a problem that stumped my engineers for days. It's just pattern recognition," Sujin said. "Once you see how energy flows through the system, the bottleneck becomes obvious. Just pattern recognition." Thokmar repeated slowly. "Human child. What you call pattern recognition is what we call genius-level engineering intuition." He began implementing her suggestion, his large hands moving with practiced skill. Within minutes, the device hummed to life, its crystal pathways glowing with steady light. "Perfect power distribution," he announced. "Better than the original design." He turned to stare at Sujin again. "How did you know to use that specific crystal?" I just looked at its structure and guessed," Sujin admitted. "She guessed," Thokmar said to Zektar. "The solution that required mathematical analysis to verify, she reached by intuition." Before Zektar could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Emergency lights flashed, and the computer's voice echoed through the corridors. "All hands to battle stations. Devourer ships detected at close range. This is not a drill." Thokmar and Zektar exchanged grim looks. "The Devourers found us," Zektar said. "They're attacking." Through the engineering section's windows, Sujin could see space filling with enemy vessels. They looked nothing like the elegant Corvani ships. The Devourer craft were dark and twisted, like metal tumors growing in the void. "Flagship shields failing," announced the computer. "Engineering teams to emergency repair stations." Thokmar grabbed equipment and ran toward the critical systems. Sujin followed, her mind already analyzing what she could see of the ship's defensive systems. The battle had begun, and somehow, she was right in the middle of it. "Sujin," Zektar called as they ran. "Are you ready to prove that humans belong among the stars?" Looking at the chaos around her, Corvani engineers struggling with failing systems, enemy ships closing in, alarms, screaming warnings. Sujin felt something she had never experienced before. She felt needed. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." The flagship's engineering section shook as enemy fire struck the hull. Sujin held onto a workstation while Corvani engineers rushed to repair failing systems. Through the chaos, she watched their movements and began to see a pattern. "Your engineers are very skilled," she told Thokmar, as he worked on a damaged power coupling, but they all work the same way. What do you mean? The chief engineer asked, not looking up from his repairs. They follow procedures perfectly. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. But what if the situation doesn't match the procedures? Before Thokmar could answer, another explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered, and several workstations went dark. Primary shield generators are offline, the computer announced. Backup systems failing. Primary shield generators. Sujin studied the engineering displays around her. The ship's defensive systems were incredibly complex, but she could see the problem. The Corvani were trying to fix each failing component individually, following their training and protocols. But the Devourer weapons were designed to overwhelm systems faster than they could be repaired. "You're fighting the wrong battle," she said suddenly. "What?" Zektar appeared beside her, his armor scorched from damage control efforts. "The Devourers aren't just attacking your shields," Sujin explained quickly. "They're attacking your predictability. Every time you repair something the standard way, they hit something else. They know how you think." Another blast shook the ship. Through the windows, she could see Corvani vessels exploding as the enemy swarmed them. "Then what do you suggest?" Thokmar demanded. Sujin looked at the engineering displays again. An idea was forming. Crazy and probably impossible, but maybe that was the point. "What if we don't repair the shields?" she said. "Are you insane?" Thokmar stared at her. "Without shields, we'll be destroyed in minutes." "No, listen. What if we reroute all shield power to the engines and weapons? Make the ship faster and hit harder instead of trying to defend." "That would be suicide," Zektar said, but his voice was thoughtful. "Not if we move unpredictably," Sujin continued, her excitement growing. "The Devourers expect you to fight defensively. They've planned for ships that try to protect themselves. But what if you did the opposite? What if you became something they can't predict?" The chief engineer shook his head. The admiral would never approve such a plan. As if summoned by his words, Admiral Vorthok's voice boomed through the ship's communication system. "All vessels. Maintain defensive formation. Concentrate shield power and wait for reinforcements." Through the windows, they watched as the Corvani fleet tried to follow orders. Ships moved into precise defensive positions, their shields glowing brightly as they absorbed enemy fire. It was exactly what the Devourers expected. The enemy response was devastating. Coordinated attacks hit the formation's weak points with surgical precision. 3 more Corvani ships exploded. "They're reading our tactics like a book," Zektar muttered. "Because you're following the book," Sujin said. "What happens when you throw away the book?" Thokmar and Zektar exchanged looks. In that moment, both Corvani warriors made a decision that would have shocked their commanders. "Show us," Thokmar said. "What?" "Your plan. Show us how to fight unpredictably." Sujin stared at them. "I don't know anything about space battles." "You know about thinking differently," Zektar said. "That's what we need." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Sujin found herself directing Corvani engineers as they rerouted power systems in ways that violated every military regulation. Shields were shut down completely. All power flowed to engines and weapons. "This is insane," Thokmar muttered as he followed her instructions. "We're making ourselves completely vulnerable." "No," Sujin said, watching the power flow displays. "You're making yourselves impossible to predict. When the Devourers attack where your shields should be, you won't be there anymore." She turned to Zektar. "Can you get us to the bridge?" "Why?" "Because I need to see the whole battle to understand the pattern." Minutes later, they stood on the flagship's command bridge. Admiral Vorthok was shouting orders at his officers, while the main screen showed the disaster unfolding around them. More than half the fleet was damaged or destroyed. "Admiral," Zektar said formally, "I request permission to implement emergency tactical modifications." "Not now, Commander," Vorthok snapped. "Can't you see we're fighting for our lives? That's exactly why you need to listen," Sujin said loudly. Every officer on the bridge turned to stare at the human child who had dared interrupt their admiral. Vorthak's golden eyes blazed with anger. How dare you? Your tactics are failing, Sujin continued, her voice stronger now. The Devourers are winning because they know exactly what you're going to do. You need to do something they can't predict. And what would a human child know about naval tactics? I know about patterns, Sujin said, pointing at the main screen. Look at how they attack. They hit your strongest ships first, because they expect you to protect them. They target your command vessels, because they know you'll try to maintain formation. They're not just fighting your weapons. They're fighting your thinking. Admiral Vorthak studied the tactical display. Even as they watched, the enemy concentrated fire on exactly the ships Sujin had predicted. Continue, he said quietly. What if one ship broke formation completely? What if it ignored all tactical doctrine and just attacked randomly? It would be destroyed instantly, one of the bridge officers objected. Maybe, Sujin said. But first, it would confuse the enemy. They'd have to split their attention. And if it worked, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone on the bridge could see what would happen if the Devourer's perfect coordination was disrupted. Admiral Vorthak was quiet for a long moment. Around them, more ships died as the battle continued its predictable course. Chief Engineer, he said finally, implement the humans' modifications on our ship only. If we're going to die anyway, we might as well die doing something unexpected. Admiral. Several officers protested. Enough, Vorthak cut them off. Commander Zektar, take our human advisor to tactical. Show her our weapons systems. As they moved to the tactical station, Sujin felt the ship changing around her. The familiar hum of shields disappeared, replaced by the deeper throb of engines running at maximum power. Weapons charged to maximum, the tactical officer reported. All power from shields rerouted successfully. Now what? Admiral Vorthak asked. Sujin studied the tactical display, seeing the battle from a completely new perspective. The Devourer ships moved in perfect coordination, like a school of fish or a flock of birds. Their strength was also their weakness. There, she said, pointing at the screen. See how they cluster around our command ships? They're so focused on the expected targets that they've left their flanks completely exposed. Those aren't flanks, the tactical officer said. Those are empty space. Exactly. They don't expect anyone to attack through empty space because it's not tactically sound. But what if tactically sound is the problem? Admiral Vorthak smiled for the first time since the battle began. It was not a gentle expression. Helm, he commanded. Take us into that empty space. Maximum speed. Random course changes. All weapons. Target whatever gets in our way. The flagship lurched forward like a hunting predator finally freed from its chains. Around them, the universe became a chaos of movement and fire as they plunged into the heart of the enemy formation. For the first time in the war, the Devourers had no idea what to do. Admiral, the communications officer reported. The other ships are requesting orders. Vorthak looked at Sujin. What do we tell them? Tell them to forget everything they learned in military school, she said with a grin. Tell them to think like humans. 3 months later, Sujin stood on the bridge of the largest fleet in galactic history. Ships from dozens of worlds filled the space around Earth, all following battle plans that would have been considered insane just months before. The human doctrine had spread across the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible. Final fleet reports coming in, Commander Zektar announced from his station. He wore new insignia now. The Corvani had promoted him after the first battle where Sujin's tactics had worked. 2,000 ships, ready for combat. Admiral Vorthak nodded approvingly. The old warrior had become one of Sujin's strongest supporters after seeing human-style tactics devastate 3 Devourer fleets. And our human engineering teams? AR. One SID. Standing by on all vessels, Chief Engineer Thokmar replied. Every ship in the fleet has been modified with human-designed improvements. Sujin smiled at that. When word had spread about what she had accomplished, Earth's governments had finally taken notice. Every nation had sent their best engineers to work with alien teams. The combination of human creativity and alien technology had produced ships more powerful than anyone had imagined. Devourer main fleet detected, the sensor officer announced. Distance, 1 million kilometers and closing. Through the main screen, they could see the enemy approaching Earth. The Devourer fleet was massive. Over 5,000 ships arranged in perfect formation. They had consumed 12 civilizations and never known defeat. They expected this battle to be like all the others. They were wrong. All ships, Admiral Vorthak commanded, implement Random Dispersal Pattern 7. Human engineering teams begin chaos protocols. Sujin watched the Allied fleet scatter in all directions. No two ships followed the same course. No patterns could be predicted. It looked like complete disorder, but every captain knew their role in the seemingly random dance. The Devourers responded as expected, trying to concentrate their fire on what should have been command vessels and key targets. But the Allies had learned to hide their important ships and make every vessel look like a threat. First wave incoming, Zektar reported. All human teams begin modifications, Sujin said into her communicator. Across the fleet, human engineers began implementing real-time changes to ship systems. Power flows were rerouted mid-battle. Weapons were reconfigured to fire in unexpected patterns. Shield frequencies were randomized every few seconds. The Devourers' perfect coordination began to fracture as they encountered systems that behaved differently from one moment to the next. Direct hit on enemy formation leader, Thokmar announced with satisfaction. Human-modified weapons are penetrating their defenses. Because they can't adapt to things they can't predict, Sujin said, watching the battle unfold. Their hive mind is their strength, but it's also their weakness. They can't think as individuals. The battle raged for hours. Ships on both sides were lost. But for the first time, the Devourers were losing more than their enemies. The alien hive mind that had conquered 12 worlds couldn't cope with the chaotic creativity of human thinking. Enemy fleet is retreating, the sensor officer announced, disbelief clear in his voice. A cheer went up from every station on the bridge. Through the communication channels, they could hear celebrations from ships across the fleet. For the first time in galactic history, the Devourers had been defeated in a direct battle. But Sujin wasn't celebrating yet. She studied the tactical display, watching the enemy retreat pattern. They're not running away, she said quietly. The bridge fell silent. Admiral Vorthak moved to her station. What do you mean? Quote, look at their formation. They're pulling back to regroup and analyze what happened. They're trying to find new patterns in our chaos. Can they do that? Maybe. They're incredibly smart, even if they think differently than we do. If we keep using the same random tactics, they'll eventually find the underlying patterns. Vorthak's expression grew grim. Sujin looked around the bridge at all the alien faces that had become familiar over the past months, Corvani warriors who had accepted her as one of their own. Engineers from a dozen species who had learned to think like humans. Friends who had trusted her crazy ideas and made them work. We need to do something they'll never expect, she said. Something so human that no logical mind could predict it. Which is, Sujin smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like what she was. A 14-year-old girl with a wild idea. We're going to surrender. Thank you for watching. The bridge erupted in protests. But Sujin held up her hand. Not really surrender. We're going to make them think we're surrendering, then do something completely illogical. She turned to the communications officer. Send a message to the Devourer fleet. Tell them Earth surrenders and requests terms for negotiation. Sujin, Zektar said urgently. If this doesn't work, it will work, she said with confidence she didn't entirely feel. Because no military mind in the galaxy would surrender when they're winning. They'll have to come close to accept our surrender. And when they do. Admiral Vorthok prompted. When they do, every ship in our fleet is going to do something different. Not random, completely different. Every captain will improvise their own battle plan with no coordination at all. Pure chaos. The bridge was quiet as everyone considered this. What Sujin was proposing went against every military tradition in known space. It's brilliant, Vorthok said finally. And completely insane. Perfectly human, Thokmar added, with what might have been admiration. The plan worked exactly as Sujin had hoped. The Devourer fleet approached Earth cautiously, expecting a trap but unable to detect the real nature of the surprise waiting for them. When the Allied ships suddenly exploded into individual, uncoordinated attacks from every direction, the enemy hive mind simply couldn't cope. Ships that should have provided covering fire instead rammed enemy vessels. Fighters that should have engaged other fighters instead targeted massive battleships. Some captains even shut down their weapons and used their ships as decoys while other vessels attacked from impossible angles. The battle lasted only 20 minutes. When it ended, the Devourer threat was over forever. As the celebrations continued around her, Sujin found herself thinking about home. Earth was safe. Humanity had earned its place among the galactic community. And she had proven that being different was exactly what the universe needed. Sujin, Admiral Vorthok, approached her station. The Galactic Council has asked me to offer you a position as humanity's first ambassador of creative strategy. She looked at the formal documents he handed her, then at the view screen showing Earth hanging peacefully in space below them. It's a great honor, she said, but I think I want to go home first. Of course. The Admiral smiled. But remember, the galaxy will always need human thinking. Will you come back? Sujin thought about her aunt and uncle, who would probably never understand what she had accomplished. She thought about her classmates, who would never believe where she had been. She thought about the scrapyard where this all began, full of broken things waiting to be fixed. Yes, she said firmly. But first, I have some things to fix on Earth. As their ship descended toward the New Sol Colony spaceport, Sujin realized she was no longer the rejected girl who had hidden in scrapyards. She was still someone who preferred machines to social gossip. But now she knew that wasn't something to be ashamed of. The universe was full of broken things that needed fixing, and apparently, humans were very good at finding creative solutions. Through the view screen, she could see people gathering at the spaceport. News of what had happened had reached Earth, and for the first time in her life, Sujin Park was coming home to a hero's welcome. But the best part wasn't the celebration waiting for her. The best part was knowing that somewhere out in the galaxy, alien engineers were learning to think like humans, solving problems in ways that would have been impossible just months ago. She had helped save the galaxy by teaching it to think differently. And that, she realized, was exactly the kind of impossible thing humans did best.